Returning now to the war in Ukraine, and Ukrainian forces are currently trying to take back territory in the south of the country near the city of Kherson. We're going to discuss this a little further now. I'm joined now by Michael Bociurkiw, who's a global affairs analyst and senior fellow at the Atlantic Council. Thanks so much for joining me this evening. Let's touch on this counterattack if we can first. And if Ukraine is successful with it and retakes Kherson to some or all extent, how significant a moment would that be?
Good to be with you. Extremely significant, not only from a military point of view, but also a psychological point of view for the Ukrainians. This is really the talk of Ukraine right now since the time I left yesterday. And it follows the military successes, apparent military successes in Crimea as well, 3 or 4 strikes there over the past few weeks. But let there be no mistake about this, as your correspondent indicated, it's a very challenging moment for the Ukrainian armed forces. They are able to use the new high-tech weaponry that came in. They're able to fire farther, and they're able to fire with more precision. However, don't forget, we're now past the 6-month mark of the war, and some of the Ukrainian servicemen who have been on the front lines that I've spoken to on trains and buses and elsewhere have told me they haven't had hardly a break since then. So there's fatigue going on as well. But I think a couple of things. The Ukrainians will try to initially do this with a lot of kind of shock and awe, but at the same time, they're going to remain pretty tight-lipped about what their strategy is going to be.
Is there only a limited window for Ukrainian counterattacks because of winter coming soon?
Oh, absolutely. The terrain will change substantially. And also, you know, if this drags on far longer than expected, it could give the Russians more of an ability to resupply and come up with new strategies. But I think the feeling in the Zelensky government and in military high-rank circles is that this has to work also to show that the West, that their support, their weaponry, all the aid that's been given to Ukraine is paying off and is having a very, very positive impact to push Russia back.
And what about Russia? Your take on, I mean, you mentioned there the tiredness of the Ukrainian forces. What about the Russian forces and back home in Russia itself, the status of the leadership there?
Sure. Well, you know, the Russians can't recruit people fast enough. And the stories we're hearing is that, you know, if you sign up or if you sign up for battle, you're hardly given any training. You're sent to the front line, given a gun, and likelihood is you'll come back in a box. So the losses on the Russian side have been in the tens of thousands, not to talk about all the equipment that's been destroyed. Your viewers probably saw the images from Independence Day and that so-called parade of captured and destroyed Russian military hardware. So time is not on the side of the Russians, that's for sure. They cannot, even with their substantial income from weaponry, reproduce the lost kit that they've lost on the battlefield. So a lot of challenges for Russia, indeed.
Let's touch on the nuclear power plant, which, of course, we've been talking about for quite a few weeks now. How close to a disaster do you think that we got? And are we sort of out of the woods there in terms of what's likely to happen over the coming weeks?
Well, you know, I don't think humanity understands how close we've come to a nuclear catastrophe. I covered the Chernobyl nuclear disaster in 1986 as a young reporter, and I feel very strongly that the same kind of stupidity, the carelessness, the callousness that caused that accident is alive and well today in the Kremlin. I fear that as Russia gets pushed back and perhaps defeated in battles like Kherson, that they will use that nuclear plant as a kind of weapon as well to gain concessions. So this is a very scary prospect. And if they don't use that, they've also have, don't forget, substantial stocks of chemical weapons, biological weapons. They have high-speed missiles that can be fired from thousands of kilometers away at very high speed towards any city in Ukraine, and also other weaponry that can cause immense devastation to parts of Ukraine. So we're certainly not out of the woods. But of course, the big hope is that the IAEA visit will proceed, that the Russians will give them unfettered access, and that they'll be able to negotiate some demilitarized zone. But I don't expect the Russians to be too accommodating, and they'll probably manipulate that visit.
As you mentioned, you've just got back from Ukraine and been spending an awful lot of time there in recent weeks. And I wonder what your assessment is of the Ukrainians' interpretation of how committed the West, particularly Europe, is to their plight, and whether they are fearful that as winter approaches and the cost of living crisis worsens, that the West will lose interest.
It is a fear, a legitimate fear. I think most Ukrainians see the United States as the kind of main guarantor of their supply of weaponry, of the training. Having said that, there's fresh talks now here where I sit in Europe of actually training the Ukrainians on European soil, changing that up a bit so that they're better prepared. You know, with all this new weaponry, high-tech weaponry coming in, it takes time to train the servicemen, but it also requires maintenance. It requires changing things out. So that's not worked very well. But I think Ukrainians, every Ukrainian you talk to wants to get this over with as soon as possible, because, you know, the other, of course, impact that the war has caused is to the economy. And I've been spending a lot of time in Lviv, Odessa. I've been to Kiev. And things are restarting very slowly, but not at the pace that we require. And with the winter coming, Ukrainians are now being prepared to have a shorter heating season because it's mostly centrally controlled, and also at lower temperatures. And one more point, big fears of residents who are left in the exposed area in the eastern, central, and southern parts of Ukraine. Many are being told to evacuate before that cold weather comes.
Michael Bociurkiw from the Atlantic Council, thanks so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
You're watching Sky News tonight, and coming up, the latest claims from the Duchess of Sussex about the impact of royal life ahead of her visit to the UK next week.